All right, we finished part 3 by talking a little bit about the nucleus of our galaxy, the very central part of the nuclear bulge. When you look up at the Milky Way on a nice clear summer or autumn night, it looks so serene and peaceful. But that belies what's at the center. At the center, it seems to be a lot of very energetic activity. One could almost say violent activity going on. There's certainly the evidence of supernovas having gone off and various other bits of gas, by bits of gas I mean huge clouds of gas, being ejected. And you have this radio source right at the center called Sagittarius A. So it's been an interesting place for a long time. And about 20 years ago, some astronomers, maybe a little over 20 years ago, some astronomers decided to use infrared telescopes to penetrate the dust and really try to map out the central portion of the galaxy where the radio waves were coming from. What they saw was that some of the stars were going around an invisible object very, very fast. So we think that that's what's causing all this activity. Here is an image of, let's see, about 7 stars that have been mapped over, in this case, about 13 years, from 1995 to 2008. And this is the most recent one I could find. Clearly, we have probably almost another 10 to 11 years of data on this as well. But this was enough time to map up the orbit of some of these stars that are moving around very, very fast around an invisible object right at the center here. The object here is called Sagittarius A star, or A asterisk. And when we figure out the velocities of these stars, some when they're in the inner portion of their orbit, swinging around this invisible source, are going millions of miles an hour. And that the only way that can happen is if there's an object that has a mass of around 4 million suns. So if you have an object that's that small, and we know, for example, the Sagittarius A radio source is only about the size of the orbit of Jupiter. So something that is smaller than our inner solar system and has a mass of about 4 million solar masses, the only conclusion you could draw is that our galaxy has at its center a supermassive 4 million solar mass black hole. It turns out that this is not the first supermassive black hole that was discovered. There were actually supermassive black holes discovered in the Andromeda Galaxy, the nearest external galaxy to our own, and other galaxies as well. And we now know that most galaxies, if not all of them, have supermassive black holes at their core. We don't know how they formed. We don't know how they got there. But we do know that they seem to be closely tied to the evolution of the galaxy in which they are embedded. Now, 4 million solar masses sounds like a lot, but our sun, as it orbits the galaxy, barely feels any gravitational tug from that supermassive black hole. When we orbit the center of our galaxy, we are mostly orbiting the stars between us and the center, and the other clouds of gas and dust and stars that are inside the sun's galactic orbit. Okay, we're going to talk more about supermassive black holes in a little while when we talk about other galaxies. Let's go on next to the chapter on galaxies. Now, the first part of this is going to be very, very descriptive and is not going to be particularly complicated. So, galaxies. First thing you do with in a science when you're not sure what to do is to classify things. This is what botanists do when they back in the 1800s, for example, when they were exploring different continents and found different types of flora, they would classify the plants and the leaves and try to make sense out of it all. Well, the same thing was true with astronomers looking at galaxies. Galaxies have all sorts of different shapes and sizes. but we can classify them into three main classes: elliptical galaxies, spiral galaxies, and irregular galaxies. Now, it turns out elliptical galaxies are the ones, first of all, they don't get any love because they are not particularly beautiful, which is kind of sad, but well, you'll see. Elliptical galaxies are the most plentiful of all galaxies. They comprise about 70% of all galaxies. They are somewhere between round and elongated, football shaped. They're sort of, you could think of either as a basketball or a rugby ball or a football. The shape might be that this galaxy here, for example, might be this type of galaxy seen along the long axis. Okay, so it's hard to tell the actual three-dimensional composition, the three-dimensional geometry of these galaxies. So they are round or oval in shape. They don't seem to have much or any gas or dust. So because of that, there's no star formation going on, and you don't see any bright stars, and you certainly don't see any spiral patterns. They tend to be composed of old red, low-mass population 2 stars. And they are similar in shape and composition to the halo portion of our galaxy. You remember the halo portion had a lot of population 2 stars, first-generation stars, and it was kind of spherical in shape. And it turns out both the largest and smallest galaxies in our universe are ellipticals. For example, clusters of galaxies, which we'll talk about shortly, often are anchored by a giant elliptical galaxy, something that might have 20 times the mass of our Milky Way. So an elliptical galaxy like this is called a giant elliptical. We actually think it formed from mergers of many, many other galaxies coming together to make one single galaxy. On the other hand, this is the Andromeda Galaxy, which is not an elliptical, it's a spiral galaxy. It is the closest large galaxy to our Milky Way. It's a little over 2 million light years away. But it has two small companions, here and here. And these two small companions are what we call dwarf elliptical galaxies. They are tiny ellipticals, just a bit larger than a globular cluster, big enough to be called a galaxy, but small enough to be called a dwarf. Then, of course, we come to spiral galaxies. These are the ones you see in all the pretty pictures from the Hubble telescope, and because, just look, they're very interesting. They have this pinwheel type shape. When you see them face on, they look like this. This galaxy, spiral galaxies are just full of interesting stuff. You got the disk component that has young population 1 stars, a lot of O and B, hot bright stars, gas, dust, H2 regions, star formation going on, and this beautiful pinwheel spiral structure. Okay. There are 2 subclasses, though, of spiral galaxies. The ones I've showed you pictures of thus far are called normal spirals. And this is where the arms wind from the center outward, like a classic pinwheel. But there are also barred spirals, where the nucleus of the galaxy is sort of elongated like this, or this. And we actually probably live in a slightly barred spiral. There is evidence now that our Milky Way has a nucleus that is somewhat elongated. And we are out amongst the spiral arms of that barred spiral. And if you ask why, we really don't know yet why there's this difference between a barred spiral and a normal spiral. Okay, and the final class of galaxy that we will talk about is called irregular galaxies. Irregulars make up 15% of all galaxies. This is the large Magellanic. Is it the large Magellanic Cloud or the small Magellanic Cloud? I'm not sure. It's one of the Magellanic Clouds. I believe it's the small one. The small Magellanic Cloud is chaotic in appearance and doesn't have a lot of structure to it. And you can see, though, that there's a lot of star formation going on. There's blue here, which means there's young stars. There's gas and dust. You can see these dark patches of dust. You can see the bright patches of glowing ionized hydrogen gas in H2 regions. And so the composition of a typical irregular galaxy is very similar to the disk of a spiral galaxy without the structure of the spiral arms. So for some reason, irregular galaxies are very similar in composition anyway to the disk of spiral galaxies, and yet they are much smaller, and they don't seem to have any definite structure, and certainly no spiral shape to them. So they tend to be anywhere between 5% to 25% the size of our Milky Way galaxy. So we also have we have two of these irregular galaxies accompanying the Milky Way on its journey through space. We have the large and small Magellanic Clouds with them, which are both small irregular galaxies. Now, clusters of galaxies. Galaxies tend to cluster together. This is one of my favorite pictures of what's called the Hercules cluster in the constellation of Hercules. So galaxies, like stars, often exist in clusters. Thousands are known to exist. They are gravitationally bound to each other. We don't know why exactly, but they do tend to cluster. You see that galaxies often are very close together and interact. This one here is actually two spiral galaxies coming together, and that's something that's going to be very important when we talk about the evolution of galaxies. But galaxies are bound together in these clusters. A rich cluster, like the Hercules cluster you just saw, consists of over 1,000 galaxies. Here's another picture of the central portion of the Virgo cluster with two very large super elliptical galaxies at its center. They're roughly spherical in shape, around 10 million light years across. You have a concentration of more galaxies toward the center, so their structure is kind of similar to a globular cluster of stars, except you have galaxies and you don't have quite as many. There's usually one or more giant ellipticals at or near the center of the cluster, providing sort of the gravitational anchor of the cluster. And then we have poor clusters. We belong to a poor cluster, less than 1,000 galaxies, because there are fewer of them and the gravitational field is not as regular. They tend to be kind of irregular in shape. Our local group includes our own Milky Way, the Andromeda Galaxy, and approximately 22 mostly dwarf ellipticals with some irregulars, and in fact I think that count has gone up to more like 26 to 30 at this point. But if we are at the center, Andromeda would be here, and within 3 million light years we have many, many galaxies scattered about, most of them very small, only two other spirals besides our own. And so that's what we call the local group. Now, classical galactic evolution, this is what we thought happened up until fairly recently. We thought that spirals formed from a cloud of gas and dust that had more spin to it, and because of that, even though some stars formed in a spherical shape, like the original cloud, the spin got faster and faster as the galaxy contracted and got smaller and smaller, and ended up flattening to a disk where you had a lot of star formation. It was thought that ellipticals didn't have as much spin, and because of that they were more chaotic, and for some reason that we didn't understand, they used up all their gas and ended up elliptical in shape. Okay, so it was, probably should change this to was, it was thought that elliptical galaxies used up all their gases in a burst of star formation when the universe was young. They have little dust or star formation and never collapsed to a disk. Okay. Spiral galaxies, on the other hand, seem to have conserved their star-forming gases, and this early formation happened while the galaxy was still elliptical in shape, and then the unused material collapsed to a disk. We no longer think that ellipticals form this way. We think that the story for spirals is probably quite similar, but ellipticals, we think it's a little bit different. We'll get to that, however, in part